Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will be presented with a case that involves armed robbery and assault. Please keep in mind that the defendant should be presumed innocent until proven guilty. The burden to prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt rests solely on the prosecution. The defense does not have anything to prove. Prosecutor, you may begin with your opening statement.
On the evening of April 17, 2010, Mrs. Wilson, the victim, was assaulted and robbed outside of her residence as she returned home from work. During this encounter, Mrs. Wilson was knocked unconscious and her purse was stolen. Today, using the testimony of an eyewitness and arresting officer, I will prove to you that the defendant has committed this despicable act. Thank you.
Defense, you may present your opening statement.
My client has been caught in an unfortunate and tragic set of circumstances. He was misidentified by the eyewitness and has been falsely accused of a crime that he did not commit. I will show you the weaknesses in the prosecution's case. After considering everything I have to say today, you should find my client not guilty of the crimes of which he has been accused. Thank you.
Please call your witness, prosecutor.
I would like to call Mr. Steve Johnson to the stand.
Please state and spell your name for the court and give your address.
My name is Steve E. Johnson, Johnsson, 1337 Emerald Avenue, Providence, Rhode Island.
Please be seated.
Mr. Johnson, could you please explain, in your own words, what happened on the evening of April 17, 2010?
My wife and I just finished eating dinner at our house. I was in the kitchen washing dishes while my wife is doing other housework.
Around what time was this?
It was about 6:10 or 6:15 p.m.
Please continue.
At our kitchen sink, there is a window that looks out into Miss Wilson's property.
Are you and Mrs. Wilson good neighbors?
We don't know each other really well, but we say hi or engage in small talk when we see each other outside on occasion.
Okay. What happened next as you were washing dishes?
As I glanced up, something caught my attention outside. I saw a man grabbing Miss Wilson and pointing a gun to her head. The man proceeded to shove Miss Wilson and then hit her over the head with a black revolver. Miss Wilson fell to the ground, and it looked like the man ran off with her purse.
So, Mr. Johnson, what did you do?
I asked my wife to call 911 while I went to the next door to check on Miss Wilson. I checked to see if Miss Wilson had a pulse, which she did. I watched over her until help arrived. The paramedics and the police arrived to the scene within minutes. She started to regain consciousness shortly after.
What else happened that night?
I was interviewed by Officer Davis. I told him what happened.
What did you tell him?
Everything I just described to you.
Did you tell him anything else?
Yes, I also described the man to him.
What did the man who assaulted and robbed Mrs. Wilson look like?
He was Caucasian, male, and about 5'10", 200 pounds, with dark hair and a beard. His facial skin tone was reddish, like when someone blushes. He was wearing black pants and a black polo shirt.
How long did you look at him?
The part of the confrontation that I witnessed took about 10 seconds.
Do you think that was enough time to get a good look at him?
Yes, I do. I really tried hard to study the man so that I could describe him to the police.
How close were you to this confrontation as it happened?
Our houses are close together. There's just a strip of lawn between us. I would say that I was no more than 15 feet away.
So close enough to get a good view.
Yes, I really tried hard to study the man.
Did anything else happen that evening?
Yes, I worked with a sketch artist to develop a composite sketch of the man.
Mr. Johnson, have you seen the man who assaulted and robbed Mrs. Wilson since the evening of April 17th?
Yes.
When was that?
The police asked me to look at some pictures and try to pick out the person who assaulted and robbed Miss Wilson.
And what happened?
I picked out the picture of the man I saw.
Is that person in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Could you point him out, please?
He's sitting right over there.
For the record, Mr. Johnson pointed at the defendant, Roger Green. Mr. Johnson, how confident are you that Roger Green is the man who robbed Mrs. Wilson?
I am 100% positive.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Defense, your witness.
You said that you viewed the confrontation for only about 10 seconds, right?
Yes, that's right.
So overall, you didn't look at the man for very long, did you?
I had enough time to study the man.
But only 10 seconds, right?
Correct.
And yet you say that you are 100% positive that you identified the right person?
Yes, that's right. I'm 100% positive.
Mr. Johnson, am I correct when I say that you identified my client from a police lineup sometime after the crime?
Yes.
And how long after the crime occurred did you make that identification?
It was 2 days later.
Did you indicate how confident you were at the time you initially made your identification as per best practice recommendations?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence the statement that Mr. Johnson made on the day of his identification.
Accepted.
Mr. Johnson, is this the statement you completed on the date of the identification?
Yes, it is.
Would you read what you wrote on the day of your identification for the court, please?
I wrote, I picked out photograph number 3. I'm 75% positive.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you with the noise outside. Could you repeat what you just said?
I wrote, I picked out photograph number 3. I'm 75% positive.
So when you made your identification, you were 75% positive, and yet a few moments ago, you reported that you are 100% positive that my client is the man who assaulted and robbed Mrs. Wilson. Memory doesn't get better with time, Mr. Johnson. How did that happen? Why are you more confident now than you were then that my client is the man who assaulted and robbed Mrs. Wilson?
I've been rehearsing my testimony a lot, but the lawyers and the police are prepared for court. I've become more confident each time I've rehearsed my testimony.
Mr. Johnson, are you saying that you have become more confident now because you have been rehearsing your testimony?
Yes, each time I rehearsed my testimony for the court with the lawyers and the police, I became more confident.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Prosecutor, any redirect?
Mr. Johnson, how confident are you right now that you made an accurate identification?
I am 100% positive.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Prosecutor, please make your closing remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, after hearing the testimony, I think you will agree with me that all of the evidence adds up. There's an eyewitness that places Mr. Green at the scene of the crime. Based on this evidence, I believe it is your duty to find Mr. Green guilty.
Defense, your closing statements?
Ladies and gentlemen, I disagree with my colleague's assessment. The prosecution has not shown anything that proves with absolute certainty that my client committed this crime. Even the lone eyewitness is not 100% sure. For this reason, I feel that you are obligated to find my client not guilty.
Defense, you may call your witness in this case.
Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Elizabeth Loftus to the stand.
Please state your name for the record and spell your last name.
Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, Loftus.
Have you written what's generally considered to be the Bible on eyewitness testimony?
Well, I wish someone would say that. I have written at least 4 books and scores of articles in the area of eyewitness testimony, but there are also many other scientists, psychological scientists, who have worked on this subject, who have written excellent books and many, many hundreds of articles.
Now you're going to testify in this case that somebody didn't see what they said they saw.
No. Without independent corroboration of some sort, you can't. No. Occasionally it's possible to find out that, the human eye could not have possibly seen that detail at that distance. But for the most part, no. You can't say whether the witness was right or wrong, only that certain factors may be present that lead an average person to make a mistake.
And you're not here to testify that someone's right or wrong, but only to offer your expertise on what might affect the accuracy of eyewitness testimony?
Absolutely, yes.
Tell us generally then, what are the things that we should look for? What are the things that affect the reliability of someone who says, I saw something? What are the things that affect how the jury should judge that?
Well, the first thing you need to realize is that memory does not work like a videotape recorder. We don't record an event and play it back later. To answer the question and set the important factors in the context of the process of eyewitness testimony, you need to realize that we divide the process into 3 major stages. So, first there is the acquisition stage. Here's a period of time where some event occurs and some information is laid down in a witness's memory system. Then the event is over, time is passing, and we refer to the second stage as the retention stage. And finally, you might approach a witness and ask certain questions, or ask the witness to make an identification. Ask the witness to retrieve information from memory. We call this the retrieval stage. Our job as researchers in this area then is to identify the factors that come into play in each of these 3 stages that affect the accuracy of someone's recollection.
What can affect the accuracy of that retrieval stage? That is, a typical situation where someone sees an event and then hours or days or weeks later is asked to report about that event.
I think I can best answer that by backing up just a little bit and starting with this retention phase. And I think it's something of a matter of common sense that the longer the passage of time, the less good your memory is going to be. But there's some other aspects that are not a matter of common sense. So, the longer the retention interval, the worse the memory. If I were to plot how good memory is as a function of time passing, whether it's seconds or minutes or days or weeks, you expect to see some sort of a forgetting curve that might look like this. It's something of a matter of common sense that memory fades over time. What's not so much a matter of common sense is that as this memory is fading, it becomes more and more vulnerable to what we call post-event information. And by this, we mean new information that becomes available to a witness after the event is completely over. That new information can sometimes supplement a person's memory, alter the memory, distort the memory, and contaminate it. So one of the factors that affects the accuracy of retrieval is whether there has been post-event information that's perhaps misleading in some way.
Would post-event information include, for instance, seeing a newspaper or television report that had the picture of a suspect in the case?
Oh, absolutely. Out in the real world, that is one of the key ways in which witnesses to some event get new information, especially if it's a high-publicity event. They see photographs or they see witness descriptions or whatever in the media, and it can act as a post-event information and can supplement or alter somebody's recollection.
If a person is shown, for instance, a lineup that is not put together very well so that the suspected person resembles the description of the culprit, but none of the others in the lineup resemble the culprit, can that be the kind of post-event information that affects memory?
Well, we don't usually call that post-event information. I would ordinarily see that put under the category of a bias testing situation. So, if you give somebody a test, it might be a photographic array and the witness is asked to pick out the person they might have seen before. If there is one person in that photographic array who matched some prior description, then many witnesses will often fasten on that one individual whether that person is the right person or the wrong person. And of course, once that selection is made, it then influences everything that happens after that.
Is there such a thing as encouraging or in supporting a questionable identification once made?
Well, when you ask that question, you're asking about a very important factor that many experts have studied and testified about, and it's called the confidence factor. When somebody, say, makes an identification or makes a retrieval, tries to answer a question based on their memory, they often will express their level of confidence when they do that. And one of the things that the studies have shown is that the relationship between how confident somebody is about their identification and how accurate they are is actually a very weak relationship. A person on the street thinks it's a strong relationship, but the scientific work in the area shows it's a very weak relationship. That means it's common to have people who are very confident and wrong, as well as other times people who are very confident and right. The other important aspect of confidence is that confidence is malleable. So you take a person who expresses a level of confidence, who says, I'm 80% sure, and you start giving them feedback in some way, communicating, even inadvertently. You pick the right person, the one we think that you should have picked. That confidence grows. They aren't more accurate, but their confidence gets stronger. That's what we mean by the malleability of confidence.
So then with some support from others, some suggestion that the witness picked the right person, the confidence level grows?
Excuse me for interrupting. Dr. Gary Wells from Iowa State, one of the leading researchers in the eyewitness area, has studied the malleability of confidence. One of the ways in which he gets this confidence to be artificially inflated is by saying to the witness, "Good, you picked the suspect." I have actually heard him give a speech in New Orleans just a few weeks ago in which he talked about one case in which, after an identification was made, the people in the police station started clapping. I'm simply saying that giving an eyewitness positive feedback can artificially bolster the witness's confidence.
Could facial expressions do the same thing?
Absolutely. Anything that conveys the idea that you picked the right person, you picked the person we'd hoped you pick, whether it was done verbally with gestures or however.
You talked about the retention period. The longer the retention period, the memory curve goes down. If the retention period is very short, that is, if the retrieval of the acquisition of the event follows soon after the acquisition of the event, then the chance for a memory fade to be at work here is less, right?
Yes, I mean, that's implied by this forgetting curve. If somebody is trying to retrieve information after a very short period of time, generally the memory is going to be at its strongest. There hasn't been time for it to decline. There hasn't been time for the witness to be exposed to post-event information. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is always accurate because there can be some sort of perceptual error. You see something and in the short period of time it takes to look away and try to remember it, you're actually introducing some error.
In eyewitness testimony or in eyewitness situations, frequently the police will have some sort of identification procedure, either a photographic spread where a number of photographs are shown at the same time. Sometimes a photographic spread is done with one picture being shown and taken back, and then the next picture being shown and then taken back, and so forth in a series. It is between these two methods, which is the best to avoid suggestiveness in trying to pick out the most similar person in a set of 6?
Believe it or not, I understand that question. So, If, for example, somebody were going to witness a 6-person photo spread, you could either display it simultaneously, laying out all 6 pictures as you see in this diagram, I hope you can see, or you could display photograph number 1 and take it away, then photograph number 2 and take it away. One method is called the simultaneous method when all photographs are shown together, as in this diagram, and in the other is shown as the sequential method. It's called the sequential method. The scientific work supports the benefit of showing things one at a time rather than laying them all at once.
Why?
The reason is what witnesses often do when they look at a simultaneous array such as this. They'll figure out the person who best fits their remembered description. So they are making what is called a relative judgment, which is the person, relatively speaking, saying that the person is closest rather than what we would like them to do, which is that the person or not? That is one of the reasons why researchers have recommended the sequential approach rather than the simultaneous approach.
Would it make a difference in this comparison that it's human nature when seeing 6 photographs to compare and pick out the one that seems the most likely? Would it make a difference if the person trying to pick out somebody knew that there was a suspect in custody and that the suspect's picture was likely in the group?
It does make a difference.
Are there studies that show this?
Yes. For many years, people have done research and made recommendations, and these recommendations are now actually incorporated into some guidelines put out by the United States Department of Justice that say, when you ask a witness to look at a photo spread or a lineup, it is important to give some sort of instruction that suggests that the person may or may not be in the photo spread or lineup. This is to make the witness feel comfortable in picking no one if the witness wants to. If the witness doesn't know the suspect is in the photo spread or lineup, the witness won't feel forced to pick someone. So that kind of instruction is the recommended procedure.
Would it make a difference if the witness had been informed, perhaps, not by the police that were showing them the identification procedure, but through rumor, through media reports, or whatever source that the police did have a suspect in custody?
Well, I think it would increase the likelihood that the person would want to pick someone because witnesses do want to be helpful. They want to be cooperative and they'll likely help solve crimes. It might increase the likelihood that they would choose someone.
No further questions at this time.
You will now be asked to listen to a set of instructions. Consider these instructions carefully when deliberating the evidence you have heard in today's trial. It is up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. Some things you should consider are: did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? A juror may believe or disbelieve all of or any part of the evidence or testimony of any witness. If after consideration of all of the evidence you determine that the state has not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Peter Brown was the person who committed these offenses, then you must find him not guilty. If, on the other hand, after consideration of all of the evidence, you are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Peter Brown was correctly identified, you will then consider whether the state has proven each and every element of these offenses charged beyond a reasonable doubt.